Signed by midnight or the SE gets everything, I said coldly, watching Philip Langdon's face drain of color on my screen. 3 months ago, this Wall Street titan had humiliated me publicly. Now he was begging. "This is extortion," he hissed. "No, Philip, this is justice," I savored his panic. "How's it feel being powerless?" "Matt, please. My investors will pull out." "Should have thought about that before poisoning another town for profit." I cut him off. I hung up and glanced at the Pennsylvania hills outside my window. Lucy would be proud when I told her. My wife had been there the night everything started, the night Philip had humiliated me in front of everyone who mattered to me. The Harvard Law School 15-year reunion was Lucy's idea, not mine. "It's one weekend," she'd insisted, adjusting my tie in our hotel room. "Most of these people probably admire what you do, even if they'd never admit it." I doubted that. Environmental law doesn't exactly scream success to the corporate law crowd. While my classmates were negotiating billion-dollar mergers or defending Fortune 500 CEOs, I was usually knee-deep in mud collecting water samples or helping small towns fight industrial polluters. Lucy looked stunning in her emerald dress as we entered the ballroom at the Charles Hotel in Cambridge. I immediately scanned the room for friendly faces, desperate for allies. "Matt Harrington, no way!" James Chen, my old study partner, caught me in a bear hug. For a few minutes, everything seemed fine. Maybe Lucy was right. Maybe this weekend wouldn't be the ego-crushing nightmare I'd imagined. Then I saw him, Philip Langdon, holding court in the center of the room, surrounded by admirers. The Golden Boy, Harvard Law Review editor, Supreme Court clerk. But instead of pursuing law, he'd gone into finance and become legendary on Wall Street. His private equity fund specialized in acquiring struggling industrial companies, stripping them for parts, and leaving communities devastated in his wake. I steered Lucy toward the bar, hoping to avoid him. But as the night wore on and the drinks flowed, the room got smaller. I was ordering a scotch when I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Matt Harrington, still saving the world one tree at a time?" I turned to face Philip, forcing a smile. "Philip, good to see you." You too, you too." He looked me up and down, assessing. "Still doing the environmental thing, right? I see your name pop up occasionally. Didn't you handle that thing in West Virginia a few years back?" I was surprised he remembered. "Yeah, the Chemtex case." Right. He nodded, signaling the bartender for another drink. "Admirable work. Not exactly lucrative, though, is it?" Before I could respond, Lucy appeared at my side. I introduced her, and Philip turned on the charm, kissing her hand and complimenting her dress. I watched as my wife, normally immune to such transparent flattery, actually blushed. "Your husband is a regular Don Quixote," Philip said to Lucy, "fighting windmills while the rest of us are building wind farms, if you know what I mean." I felt my jaw tighten but managed to keep smiling. "Matt's work is very important," Lucy said, squeezing my arm. "Oh, absolutely," Philip agreed with exaggerated enthusiasm. By now, several of our former classmates had drifted over, sensing entertainment. Philip, ever the performer, raised his voice. "Matt, you're still running around forests trying to save some rare frog? I made more money last quarter off shares in Westlake Chemical than you'll see in your lifetime. I could buy your entire forest and turn it into a golf course." Laughter rippled through the group. I felt Lucy's hand tighten on my arm. I could have walked away, should have walked away, but something in me snapped. "And how many communities have you poisoned to make that money, Philip?" The laughter stopped. Philip's smile hardened into something ugly. "Excuse me? I've seen the aftermath of the companies your fund acquires. You gut environmental compliance departments, defer maintenance on containment systems, pump up short-term profits, and then bail before the cancer clusters start showing up in the data." Philip's face flushed crimson. He leaned in close enough that I could smell the expensive bourbon on his breath. "That's the difference between us, Matt. You see problems, I see opportunities. While you're filing motions that get denied by judges I play golf with, I'm creating value for my investors. That's why I have a 9-figure net worth and you're still driving a Subaru?" He looked at the crowd, then back at me. "Keep fighting the good fight, though. The world needs its dreamers." He clapped me on the shoulder and walked away, leaving me standing there with Lucy in a circle of former classmates trying not to meet my eyes. I downed my scotch in one swallow. "We should go," Lucy whispered. I nodded, but as we turned to leave, I heard Philip's voice again, louder this time, clearly meant for me to hear. Some people just don't have what it takes. Not everyone can play in the big leagues. We left the reunion early. In the cab back to our hotel, Lucy tried to comfort me. "He's just a bully, Matt. What you do matters." "I know," I said, but the words felt hollow. The truth was, Philip had struck a nerve. I'd spent 15 years fighting for environmental justice, and what did I have to show for it? A modest practice, a mountain of student debt, and a reputation as an idealistic crusader that corporate law firms wouldn't touch. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, Philip's mocking face floating in the darkness above me. By morning, something had hardened inside me. I wasn't going to let Philip Langdon define who I was or what my work meant. And if fate ever gave me the chance to show him exactly what I was capable of, I wouldn't hesitate. I didn't have to wait long. 3 weeks after the reunion, I was in my Pittsburgh office when my assistant knocked on my door. "There's a Ms. Rodriguez here to see you. Says she's from Riverdale. She doesn't have an appointment, but she seems pretty upset." Riverdale was a small town about an hour east of Pittsburgh. Former steel country, now mostly forgotten like so many towns in the Rust Belt. Elena Rodriguez was in her early 60s, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and the weathered hands of someone who'd worked in factories her whole life. She sat across from me, back straight, eyes clear and determined. "Mr. Harrington, I'm here because we need help, and everyone says you're the only lawyer in Western Pennsylvania who might take our case." She explained that Riverdale had once been home to Keystone Manufacturing, a factory that had produced industrial equipment for decades before closing down in the early 2000s. The factory had been sitting abandoned for years, an environmental time bomb of asbestos, lead paint, and chemical residue. 2 months ago, this company called Horizon Industrial Partners bought the factory, she continued. They held this big town meeting, promised to revitalize the facility, bring back jobs. The mayor and council are falling all over themselves to approve permits, giving tax breaks. "But you don't trust them," I guessed. Elena's eyes flashed. "My husband worked at that factory for 30 years before it closed. Died of lung cancer 5 years later. Half the people on my block have cancer or respiratory diseases. And now these Wall Street types want to restart production without any real cleanup, using the same old equipment. No, Mr. Harrington, I don't trust them." She handed me a glossy brochure. "Horizon Industrial Partners, Revitalizing American Manufacturing," the cover proclaimed. I flipped it open and felt my heart skip a beat. There, smiling confidently from the page, was Philip Langdon. "Horizon is a subsidiary of Langdon Capital," Elena explained. "They're moving fast, already bringing in equipment. The mayor says they'll be operational by end of summer." I stared at Philip's face, feeling that same anger from the reunion night rising in my chest. This wasn't just any case anymore. This was personal. "I'll help you," I said. "But I need to be honest. These cases are difficult to win, especially when local government is already on board with the development." She nodded. "We don't have much money, but the community can raise something." I held up my hand. "Let's not worry about payment right now. First, I need to visit Riverdale, see the factory, talk to more residents. Then we'll decide on a strategy." I called Lucy that night and told her I'd be traveling to Riverdale the next day. "This wouldn't happen to have anything to do with a certain arrogant financier who shall remain nameless, would it?" she asked, her voice knowing. "It's a legitimate case, Lucy. These people need help." "I'm sure they do," she said. "Just be careful, Matt. Don't let this become about your ego instead of their needs." I promised I wouldn't, but as I packed my briefcase the next morning, I couldn't deny the satisfaction I felt at the prospect of derailing Philip Langdon's plans. Riverdale looked like 1,000 other struggling, post-industrial towns across America. Main Street featured more empty storefronts than businesses. The factory dominated the eastern edge of town, a sprawling complex of red brick buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Even from outside, I could see workers moving equipment in and out. Philip wasn't wasting any time. Elena had arranged for me to meet with a group of concerned citizens at the local diner. About 20 people showed up, mostly older residents who'd either worked at the factory or lived near it. They shared stories of mysterious illnesses, of watching friends and family members suffer, of unanswered questions about what chemicals might be lurking in their soil and water. The EPA did some testing back in 2010, said George Winters, a former shift supervisor. Found all kinds of nasty stuff, but then nothing happened. No cleanup, no fines, nothing. That's because the company declared bankruptcy, explained another resident, left the mess for someone else to deal with. And now Langdon Capital swoops in, buys the property for pennies on the dollar, and gets to start fresh without addressing any of the contamination. I said, "So what can we do?" Elena asked. "File a lawsuit?" A lawsuit is one option, but they take years and Langdon has deep pockets for legal battles. We need leverage, something that would force them to deal with us directly. Like what? George asked. I'm not sure yet. I need to do some research, look at property records, permits, local ordinances. There might be something we can use. Over the next 3 days, I dug into Riverdale's history. I spent hours at the county records office, the town hall, and the local historical society. I interviewed dozens of residents, took water and soil samples, and photographed the factory from every accessible angle. On my 4th day in Riverdale, I found something. The Historical Society had an archive of maps dating back to the town's founding in the 1870s. The earliest maps showed that before the factory was built, the land it now occupied had been part of a public commons centered around a natural spring. The spring had been a gathering place for the community and the source of a stream that ran through the town. When the factory was built in the 1920s, the spring was enclosed within the property. But, and this was key, the deed included a specific easement. The natural spring located on the northwestern portion of the property shall remain accessible to the residents of Riverdale in perpetuity, with a right-of-way to be maintained from Oak Street to said spring. This easement had never been removed from the deed, despite changing hands multiple times over the decades. It had simply been forgotten as the spring was built over and the factory expanded. I called Elena immediately. I need to speak with the oldest residents of the town, anyone who might remember a spring on the factory property. She found 3 elderly residents who recalled their parents or grandparents talking about the spring. One, a 92-year-old woman named Dorothy Miller, even remembered visiting it as a child before the factory expanded during World War II. It was so clear, she told me, her milky eyes distant with memory. We'd go on hot summer days. The water was cold, even in August. Then they built that new wing of the factory, and we couldn't get to it anymore. Do you remember where exactly it was? She described the location which matched the old maps. According to my research, that area was now underneath what had been the factory's chemical storage facility, precisely where Horizon Industrial Partners was planning to restart operations. I spent that night researching water rights and easements under Pennsylvania law. By morning, I was confident we had something powerful, a legal right that had never been extinguished, despite being ignored for decades. It means, I explained to Elena and the other community leaders, that the community of Riverdale still has a legal right to access the spring on the factory property. More importantly, since the spring feeds groundwater systems throughout the area, we can argue that any industrial activity that might contaminate it violates your rights under the easement. But the spring has been built over for decades, George pointed out. That doesn't matter legally. The easement was never formally terminated, and Pennsylvania courts have consistently upheld that water rights and easements remain valid unless explicitly revoked, regardless of whether they have been exercised. So we can stop them? Elena asked, hope creeping into her voice for the first time. Maybe, at minimum, we can force them to deal with us, but we need to move fast before they get any further with their renovations. The next step was to approach the town council. I'd learned that they had a meeting scheduled for the following evening to approve the final permits for Horizon. Elena spread the word, and by the time the meeting started, the council chambers were packed with residents. The mayor, a slick-talking man named Robert Jenkins, seemed taken aback by the crowd. He'd clearly been expecting to rubber stamp the permits without much scrutiny. When it came time for public comment, I stepped up to the microphone. Good evening, my name is Matthew Harrington. I'm an environmental attorney representing concerned citizens of Riverdale regarding the Keystone Factory redevelopment. I explained our discovery of the easement and its legal implications. As I spoke, I watched the mayor's face change from irritation to concern. In light of this information that I concluded, I urge the council to delay approval of these permits until Horizon Industrial Partners addresses the community's legal right to the spring and guarantees that their operations will not contaminate this water source. The mayor cleared his throat. Mr. Harrington, while this is interesting historical information, the fact is that Horizon has already invested millions in this project. The economic benefits to Riverdale will be minimal compared to the health costs if they're allowed to operate without proper environmental safeguards, I interrupted. And no economic benefit justifies ignoring the legal rights of your constituents. The room erupted in applause. The mayor looked around nervously, then conferred with the town attorney, who was frantically flipping through documents. We'll take this under advisement, the mayor finally said. The permit decision is delayed until our next meeting, 2 weeks from today. It wasn't a victory, but it was a start. As we filed out of the chambers, Elena squeezed my arm. That was amazing, but they're just going to find some way around it, aren't they? Probably, I admitted, which is why our next step is to go public with this information and file for an emergency injunction to stop all work at the factory while the easement issue is resolved. The legal filings took me 3 days to prepare. Meanwhile, Elena and the others organized a community meeting to explain the situation to the broader public. Word spread quickly, and by the end of the week, local TV stations were running stories about the forgotten spring and the community's fight against Horizon. I was leaving the courthouse after filing our injunction request when my phone rang. Unknown number. Matt Harrington speaking. Mr. Harrington. The voice was smooth, professional. This is Vanessa Klein, legal counsel for Horizon Industrial Partners. I understand you've been stirring up some concerns in Riverdale. Just ensuring my client's legal rights are respected, Ms. Klein. Of course. Look, there's been a misunderstanding. Horizon is committed to being a good corporate citizen. We'd like to invite you to meet with our executives to discuss these concerns directly. Perhaps we can find a solution that works for everyone. Translation: they wanted to offer me money to go away. I'd be happy to meet, I said. When and where? How about tomorrow? We can send a car to bring you to our Pittsburgh office. That won't be necessary. I'll drive myself. Horizon's Pittsburgh office occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown tower. The receptionist led me to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Vanessa Klein was waiting for me, along with 2 men in expensive suits who introduced themselves as Horizon executives. Conspicuously absent was Philip Langdon. Thank you for coming, Mr. Harrington, Vanessa began. We've reviewed your filings regarding the alleged easement on the Riverdale property. There's nothing alleged about it, Ms. Klein. It's clearly documented in the property records. She smiled thinly. Be that as it may, easements can be extinguished through many means, including abandonment. No one has attempted to access this spring in over 70 years. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court has consistently held that non-use does not constitute abandonment of an easement. You know that as well as I do. One of the executives leaned forward. Mr. Harrington, let's cut to the chase. We understand the community has concerns, and we want to address them. Horizon is prepared to establish a community benefit fund of $500,000 to be used for local health initiatives, infrastructure improvements, whatever the town needs most. That's very generous, Bart, I said, but it doesn't address the legal issue of the easement. We're also willing to incorporate state-of-the-art environmental monitoring systems in our operations, the other executive added. Regular reporting to the community, complete transparency. I shook my head. Again, that doesn't resolve the fundamental legal problem. The community has a right to access the spring, which is currently located underneath your proposed chemical storage area. Unless you're planning to redesign the entire facility, we've also prepared an offer for your clients directly, Vanessa interrupted, sliding a folder across the table. A settlement agreement that would resolve all potential claims. I opened the folder. The document inside proposed a payment of $3 million to be divided among the named plaintiffs in exchange for terminating the easement and releasing all claims against Horizon. Plus a $250,000 consulting fee for you, Vanessa added, watching my face carefully. And there it was, the bribe, thinly disguised as a consulting fee. They thought I could be bought. I closed the folder and slid it back. My clients are not interested in selling their water rights, and I'm not interested in consulting for Horizon. The executives exchanged glances. Mr. Harrington, one said, his voice hardening, you should understand what you're up against. Horizon has the resources to fight this claim for years. Your clients will get nothing, and that factory will sit empty while Riverdale continues to decay. Is that a threat? It's reality, Maya, he said. We're trying to be reasonable here. I stood up. If you want to be reasonable, redesign your facility to protect the spring and guarantee it won't be contaminated. Institute a proper cleanup of the existing pollution. Establish a health monitoring program for residents. Then we can talk about a reasonable solution. That's not economically viable, the other executive snapped. Then I guess we'll see you in court. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. Oh, and please tell Philip Langdon that I said hello. I'm surprised he didn't join us today. Vanessa's carefully composed face registered surprise. Mr. Langdon isn't involved in the day-to-day operations of Horizon. No, that's odd because this project has all his hallmarks. Cut corners, maximize short-term profits, ignore environmental impacts. Classic Langdon capital strategy. I left them sitting there, no doubt already calling Philip to report on the failed negotiation. The next week was a whirlwind. The judge granted our emergency injunction, halting all work at the factory pending a hearing on the easement issue. Horizon's lawyers filed multiple motions to dismiss, all of which were denied. The story gained traction in regional media, with several environmental groups offering support. Through it all, I kept waiting for Philip to make an appearance. This was quickly becoming a public relations problem for Langdon Capital. Yet he remained conspicuously absent from the proceedings. Then, 10 days after our meeting in Pittsburgh, I received another call from an unknown number. You've made your point, Matt. Philip's voice, unmistakable in its cultivated arrogance. Now let's resolve this like reasonable people. Hello, Philip. I was wondering when you'd surface. I'd like to meet. Just you and me. No lawyers, no posturing. We can figure this out. I considered declining, but curiosity got the better of me. When and where? Tomorrow, noon. There's a restaurant called Riverview on the outskirts of Riverdale. Private, quiet. We can talk candidly. I'll be there. I arrived at the restaurant 15 minutes early. It was an upscale place that seemed out of place in a struggling town like Riverdale, probably where the few remaining local executives entertain clients. The hostess led me to a private dining room in the back, where Philip was already waiting, nursing a glass of scotch. He stood as I entered, offering his hand. I shook it briefly. Matt, thanks for coming. He gestured to the chair across from him. Can I get you a drink? Water is fine. Philip smiled tightly. Still the Puritan, I see. Just not interested in drinking in the middle of a workday. Fair enough. He sat back down, studying me. You know, when they first brought this easement issue to my attention, I didn't connect it to you. Small town in Pennsylvania, environmental lawyer stirring up trouble. Could have been anyone. Then I saw your name on the injunction filing. He chuckled. I have to admit, it's a clever approach. Most environmental lawyers would have gone straight for the pollution angle, filed federal claims that would take years to resolve. This isn't about being clever, Philip. It's about protecting a community from corporate predators like you. His smile didn't waver. Is that what we're doing here, Matt? Protecting the community? Or is this about the reunion? About what I said to you? Does it matter? The easement is real. The legal claim is valid. Everything's negotiable. He leaned forward. Let me be direct. The Riverdale project is important to Langdon Capital. We've invested heavily, made commitments to investors. I'm prepared to make significant concessions to resolve this issue quickly. What kind of concessions? Full environmental remediation of the site before operations begin, state-of-the-art pollution controls on all equipment, a $10 million community trust fund, and, he paused for effect, A redesign of the facility to preserve access to the spring with appropriate safeguards to prevent contamination. It was substantially more than what his executives had offered in Pittsburgh. If I were truly just focused on environmental protection, it would be a win. And what about future operations? I asked. Your plan was to extract maximum profit for 3 to 5 years and then shut down, leaving another environmental disaster behind. Philip spread his hands. We can discuss operational commitments as well, longer timeline, responsible closure provisions. Why should I trust you to keep any of these promises? Because they'll be legally binding, with substantial penalties for non-compliance. And because, frankly, you've put me in a corner. This situation is starting to attract attention I don't need. The easiest solution is to give you what you want. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception. But Philip was a master negotiator, his expression revealing only what he wanted it to. I'll need to discuss this with my clients, I said finally. Of course, he slid a folder across the table. Here's an outline of what I'm proposing. Review it with them. But I need an answer quickly, Matt. Every day, this project is delayed, costs us money. I took the folder without opening it. I'll be in touch. As I stood to leave, Philip said, You know, you could have a place at Langdon Capital, Matt. Someone with your skills, your moral compass. We could use that perspective. I laughed out loud. Are you offering me a job? Why not? You've proven you can find leverage where others see nothing. That's valuable in my world. I'm not interested in helping you pillage communities more efficiently, Philip. He shrugged. The offer stands. Think about it. I left the restaurant with the folder tucked under my arm, shaking my head at Philip's audacity. Even now, he was trying to co-opt me, to bring me into his world. He still didn't understand what really motivated me. That evening, I met with Elena and the core group of Riverdale activists at the local library. I laid out Philip's proposal without revealing the job offer. It's more than I expected, I admitted. The environmental remediation alone would be a major victory. Elena studied the documents, her expression skeptical, and we're supposed to trust them to follow through. The agreement would include oversight mechanisms, regular reporting, financial penalties for non-compliance. But once they're operational, they'll have leverage again, George pointed out. They can threaten to close down, eliminate jobs. That's true, I acknowledged. There's no perfect solution here. The group debated for hours. Some were ready to accept the offer, seeing it as the best outcome they could hope for. Others were more cynical, convinced that Langdon would find ways to circumvent any agreement. What do you think we should do? Elena finally asked me. I considered carefully before answering. The offer is substantial, better than what we'd likely get after years of litigation. But what? But I don't trust Philip Langdon, and I'm not convinced this deal gives you enough protection long term. So you think we should reject it? George asked. I think we should counter, ask for more, not just money, but structural changes to how the facility operates, with community oversight built into every level. Elena nodded slowly. Make a specific counter-proposal? Yes, and I have some ideas about what that might look like. For the next 2 days, we worked on our counteroffer. It included everything Philip had proposed, plus community representation on Horizon's local board, veto power over certain operational decisions, and a profit-sharing arrangement that would give Riverdale residents a stake in the facility's success. I called Philip to arrange another meeting. You're not seriously rejecting my offer, he said when I told him we had a counter-proposal. Not rejecting, countering. That's how negotiation works, Philip. He sighed dramatically. Fine. Same place tomorrow at noon. When I arrived at the restaurant the next day, Philip was already there again, but this time he wasn't alone. Vanessa Klein sat beside him, along with another man I didn't recognize. I hope you don't mind, Philip said, not sounding remotely apologetic. I brought some colleagues. Vanessa, you know, this is James Whitaker, our operations director. I sat down, placing my folder on the table. I thought we agreed to meet alone. I decided I needed my experts present for this discussion. Now let's see this counter-proposal of yours. I handed over the document. Philip skimmed it, his expression darkening with each page. When he finished, he passed it to Vanessa without comment. This is completely unworkable, he said finally. Community oversight, veto power over operational decisions, profit sharing. You're not asking for environmental protections anymore, Matt. You're asking for ownership. We're asking for partnership, I corrected. The community has suffered from decades of environmental negligence. They deserve a say in what happens on that property going forward. Philip leaned forward, all pretense of friendliness gone. Let me be clear. Langdon Capital will never agree to these terms. Never. You're overplaying your hand. Because from where I sit, you have a $100 million project that can't move forward because of an easement held by my clients. That gives us considerable leverage. Easements can be condemned through eminent domain, Vanessa interjected smoothly. We've already been in discussions with the State Economic Development Authority. It was a bluff, and not a particularly good one. The state can't condemn an easement for the benefit of a private company without a compelling public interest. And given the growing media attention on this case, I doubt they're eager to intervene on your behalf. Philip's jaw tightened. What do you really want, Matt? Is this about the community, or is it about getting back at me for some perceived slight? Why can't it be both? I replied coolly. You humiliated me in front of my wife and colleagues. You mocked my career, my values, everything I stand for. And now you're trying to destroy another community for profit. So yes, I'm enjoying watching you squirm, but that doesn't make our legal claim any less valid or our counter-proposal any less reasonable. Philip stood abruptly. This meeting is over. Vanessa, prepare for full litigation. No more settlement discussions. I remain seated. You're making a mistake, Philip. This could be resolved today if you were willing to consider real partnership with Riverdale. I don't partner with small-town nobodies or sanctimonious lawyers, he snapped. Langdon Capital doesn't negotiate with economic terrorists. I laughed at the absurdity of his characterization. Economic terrorists? That's rich coming from a man whose business model is essentially strip mining communities. Philip stormed out, followed by James. Vanessa lingered, gathering her papers. He doesn't like losing, she said quietly. Neither do I. She gave me an appraising look. This will get ugly, you know. They'll dig into your past, look for anything they can use against you or your clients. I expected nothing less. Philip's warning about things getting ugly proved accurate. Within days, private investigators began appearing in Riverdale, asking questions about Elena and other community leaders. Anonymous flyers circulated suggesting that our lawsuit would destroy any chance of economic revival for the town. The mayor called a special town meeting where he announced that if the Horizon project fell through, the town would face a budget crisis that might lead to cuts in essential services. He didn't explicitly blame us, but the implication was clear. Meanwhile, Horizon's legal team launched an all-out assault on our easement claim, filing motions challenging everything from the historical documentation to the standing of current residents to enforce a right created in the 1920s. I was working 18-hour days, fighting legal battles on multiple fronts, while also trying to maintain community support in the face of mounting pressure. The stress was enormous, but I refused to back down. Every time I felt like giving up, I remembered Philip's smug face at the reunion, his casual dismissal of everything I stood for. 3 days before our court date, I received an unexpected visitor at my motel room in Riverdale. A nervous young man in a rumpled suit introduced himself as Alex Torres, a junior analyst at Langdon Capital. I shouldn't be here, he said, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting to be followed. But I couldn't stay silent anymore. About what? I asked, ushering him inside. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket. Internal documents about the Riverdale project. Assessment reports that were suppressed, emails discussing how to circumvent environmental regulations, the real timeline for the facility, 3 years of operation, then abandonment. I stared at the flash drive. Why are you giving me this? My grandmother died of cancer after working in a factory like this one. I joined Langdon Capital thinking I could change things from the inside, but he shook his head. This is wrong. What they're doing is wrong. You realize this could cost you your job? I know, but I can get another job. These people can't get another town. After he left, I spent the night reviewing the documents. They were damning. clear evidence of Langdon Capital's intent to exploit Riverdale with no regard for the environmental or human costs. Philip had personally signed off on a strategy document that described the plan as maximum extraction, minimal investment, scheduled abandonment. I called Elena immediately. We have what we need, but we have to move fast. The next morning, I filed an amended complaint with the court, attaching the most damning of the documents as exhibits. I also sent copies to several environmental organizations and journalists who had been covering the story. By afternoon, the story had exploded. Corporate predator targets struggling town, read one headline. Langdon Capital's toxic strategy exposed, proclaimed another. Philip's photo appeared alongside stories detailing his company's history of environmental violations and community abandonment. My phone rang less than an hour after the first stories broke. Philip again. What the hell have you done? He hissed, fury making his voice shake. Just provided some context for our legal claims, I said calmly. The public deserves to know what you were planning for Riverdale. Those documents were stolen, confidential. I'll have you disbarred for this. They were provided by a whistleblower concerned about illegal activity. That's protected by law, as you well know. This isn't over, Matt, not by a long shot. Actually, Philip, I think it is. Your investors are already calling, aren't they? Wondering why they're suddenly associated with this toxic story. Your stock is probably dropping as we speak. How long before the board starts asking questions about your judgment? Silence on the other end. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to call off your lawyers and your private investigators. You're going to accept our counterproposal, all of it, and you're going to issue a public apology to the people of Riverdale for attempting to exploit their community. Go to hell. I'm sure the SEC would be interested in some of these documents too, especially the ones showing how you misrepresented environmental liabilities to investors. More silence then. You're bluffing. Check your email in 5 minutes. I'll send you a preview of what they'll be receiving tomorrow morning, unless we have a deal. I hung up, then assembled a package of documents highlighting potential securities violations and sent them to Philip. 30 minutes later, my phone rang again. What do you want? His voice was flat, defeated. I already told you. Full acceptance of our counter proposal, public apology, and one more thing, your personal guarantee on all commitments, not just corporate liability. That's insane. No private equity executive puts personal guarantees on portfolio companies. First time for everything. Either that or I make some calls to the SEC tomorrow morning. He exhaled slowly. You've got until midnight to send over the final paperwork. After that, all offers are off the table. I'll have it to you within the hour. And that's how I found myself 3 months after being humiliated at my law school reunion, watching Philip Langdon sweat through his custom suit as he contemplated the destruction of his carefully built empire. The documents were signed by 11 p.m. By the next morning, Horizon Industrial Partners had issued a press release announcing a groundbreaking community partnership in Riverdale, featuring full environmental remediation, community oversight, and profit sharing. Philip's personal guarantee wasn't mentioned, but it was there in the legal documents, binding him to every promise. 2 days later, I stood beside Elena as she addressed a jubilant crowd at the Riverdale Town Hall. For decades, corporations have taken what they wanted from this town and left us with nothing but sickness and decay, she said, her voice strong and clear. Today, that changes. Today, we take back our power and our future. The crowd erupted in cheers. As I looked out at their faces, hopeful for the first time in years, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with besting Philip Langdon. This was what real victory looked like, not humiliation, but transformation. 6 months later, the Riverdale project was underway, proceeding exactly as our agreement had specified. The environmental cleanup was thorough, the facility redesign preserved and protected the spring, and the Community Oversight Board was actively involved in all major decisions. Philip had retreated from public view, his reputation damaged by the scandal. Langdon Capital continued operating, but rumors swirled about investor unrest and possible leadership changes. I had expanded my practice, hiring 2 additional attorneys to help with the influx of cases from other communities facing similar situations. The Riverdale case had become something of a template, proof that even the most powerful corporations could be held accountable. One evening, as I was preparing to leave my office, my assistant told me I had a visitor. He wouldn't give his name, just said it was important. I opened my office door to find Philip Langdon standing there, looking older and more haggard than when I'd last seen him. "Philip, this is unexpected. May I come in?" I gestured to a chair. He sat down heavily, running a hand through his now noticeably grayer hair. "I wanted to see you in person," he said, "to tell you that you've won more completely than you know. The board asked for my resignation this morning." I hadn't expected that. "I'm sorry to hear that." He laughed bitterly. "No, you're not. This is exactly what you wanted." "What I wanted was for Riverdale to be treated fairly. What happened to you was a consequence of your own actions, not my goal." He was silent for a moment. "Maybe, but you played the game better than I did. I underestimated you, Matt, at the reunion and every step since." "It wasn't a game to me, Philip. These are people's lives we're talking about." "I know that now." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I came to give you this." I opened it cautiously. Inside was a check made out to the Riverdale Community Health Fund for $5 million. Personal account, not corporate. "What's this for?" "Call it a personal penance or an investment in a better approach. The board is restructuring Langdon Capital's entire investment strategy, more sustainable, more community-focused. They won't admit it publicly, but Riverdale was the catalyst." I set the check on my desk. "Why are you really here, Philip?" He sighed. "To tell you that you were right about everything. It took losing almost everything to see it, but communities do matter more than profit margins." He stood up. "I won't take any more of your time. Good luck with your practice, Matt. You've earned your success." As he reached the door, I called after him. "That job offer still open?" He turned, surprise evident on his face. "You wouldn't seriously consider it?" "No," I agreed, "but it's nice to be asked." For the first time since I'd known him, Philip Langdon laughed genuinely. "Touché, Matt, touché." After he left, I sat at my desk, turning the check over in my hands. It wasn't about the money, and it never had been. It was about respect for communities like Riverdale, for the work I did, for the values I believed in. I called Lucy to tell her what had happened. "So the mighty Philip Langdon finally fell," she said when I finished the story. "Looks that way. And how does it feel?" I thought about it for a moment. Less satisfying than I expected, but the changes in Riverdale, those feel better than I ever imagined. "That's because you're not like him, Matt. You never were. That's why I love you." I smiled, feeling a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. "I'll be home in an hour. Let's celebrate." "What are we celebrating?" "The fact that some things aren't for sale, and sometimes the little guy actually wins."